Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Journey of a Joyful Life podcast. I'm so excited that you're here with us today. I'm your host, Melodie Chandler, and today we have a special guest, Whitney Moody. I'm so glad that you're here.
Yes, I'm tickled. This is awesome.
Oh, this is like a dream for me. Number one, to get to come to Georgia, and number two, especially just to get to see Max and to see you and yeah, all the feelings. Whenever I saw him, I was like, oh my goodness, he's so grown up.
I know. Yes. 10 years it's been. But yeah, seeing the two of you earlier interacting together, oh, my heart.
Yes. And there's just so much that goes on, in my heart because I just loved all my babies so much. And then I just prayed so hard that God would provide all these families for them. And then whenever I get to see it lived out, and I get to see you on social media, that's fun. But living so far away, the last time I saw him, he was so much younger, and, kids change and grow and stuff like that. And I just always have hope in my heart, like, Lord, help them always to know that I love them, even if they have no recollection of, what happened to them when they were a baby, but just that there's some sort of love. And then I try really hard not to have expectations.
Right.
And I would just say that today, far exceeded any expectation I could have had. So it was so special. So thank you for coming.
Yes.
And even where we're doing our podcast today is far from your house. It's not Texas far, but it's still far. So thank you for coming.
Of course.
Well, I think in this season of podcasts, we are really trying to focus on adoption and children with disabilities. So from the perspective of having a child biologically and having a child from adoption, it is very different. And the feelings that you have for that are very different. And what I love so much about you is that you have both.
Right.
You have both experiences. And a couple of weeks ago in our podcast, we interviewed a mom, and her biological child had Down syndrome, and her biological child is now in her 30s. And so it was a beautiful story. But, when you have a child that's an adult, you can remember the past in a different way, than whenever you're kind of still in the throes of, do they still need therapy, or am I providing for all their educational needs and all those kinds of things. And so if you could just start today by telling us your story. Tell us the story of your family, and then how Jude came into that, and then how Max came into that.
Yes. So, like I said, I'm Whitney. I'm a little nervous. And I married my high school sweetheart, Michael. And in high school, we planned out our family. We knew we wanted to have 4 children, and we knew we wanted to adopt number 4. That was kind of our plan. And so we got married, and we had our oldest daughter, Michaela, who's now a junior at University of Georgia. And then we had our son, MT, who's a senior in high school about to graduate. And but then we entered a really hard season of we weren't able to get pregnant, or if we did get pregnant, it would end in a miscarriage. And so we tried fertility treatments and went down that road, and that was not a fun road. It was a very difficult road.
Yes.
And so by the time it was August 2012, and it had taken its toll on us, and we just decided, you know what, this it's okay. We don't have to have another child biologically or anything. And so we decided to stop. And so with adoption, I had never considered foster care. That was just something that seemed really difficult to me, because the idea of bringing children into my home and then potentially them leaving just seemed really hard. But our church is very adoption focused, and we've had a lot of families that foster through the years. And so every year in November for Orphan Awareness, we do something, to raise awareness. And so this particular year, we showed a video, and it was a documentary, and it was about the American foster care system. Okay. And so I'm sitting in church watching this video, and there's this one family in the video, and they see it as their role is to love a child that comes into their home as fiercely as they can, to show the love of Jesus, because that might be the only time that child feels that love, or, has that experience. And so it was kind of just, knock in the head. And I was like, okay, God, I get it. It's not about me and my feelings. It's about a child that needs love. And so I talked to, with Michael, and we discussed, okay, let's start the foster process. And so We started the foster care process of, going through the sunshine meeting and training and all of that. And part of it was you had to answer. Now, I mean, this is back in 2012. So, technology
Yeah.
was advanced, but still,
Yeah.
it was a paper application this thick.
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, you had to answer so many questions handwritten. So we had finally finished this document, and it was sitting on my dining room table. And kind of a side story is I had a younger sister, Lindsay, and she was very sick. She was waiting on a kidney and lung transplant at the time, and had already previously had a kidney transplant from my dad, but that had failed. And she had this take. She took a lot of medication, and it changed her taste buds. So she had this really annoying habit of. We both love Dr. Pepper.
Okay.
And she would get a Dr. Pepper thinking that her taste buds had magically changed, and she would take a taste of it and set it down. And so the joke was, I mean, there was always Dr. Peppers everywhere, because, her taste buds did not change. And so she was at my house, she had a Dr. Pepper, and she left it on the dining room table, and MT comes up, and he's playing as a little boy does, and he knocks it over on our application. Destroys it. So much work. And at the time, I was just like, are you kidding me? Lindsay, why MT? But I see it now as just kind of, God's hand in things, because just a few weeks later, my sister passed away waiting for those two transplants. And so she was my best friend. She was a phenomenal aunt to my children. So my whole family, we were grieving extremely hard. And so I see it as, because if we turned in that application as we were supposed to, we would be, in the thick of it. And it just wasn't the right timing for us. Yeah. Our family needed to grieve in a healthy way before we brought in a broken child into my home that felt so broken at the time.
Yes.
And so we let them know, we put a pause on it and said, we'll revisit it in the fall, see how we're doing. But that August of 2013, so a full year since I had done anything fertility wise, we found out we were pregnant. Wow. And we were blown away, just shocked. And so my doctor was treating me with kid gloves because of my past history, and very protective of me. And so, he was, checking me all along and just making sure the pregnancy was progressing. And in October, we were doing, one of his precautionary ultrasounds, and the tech saw something and brought the doctor in. And he just said, there's something going on, and I think you need to go see a specialist. And so he sent me to Atlanta to a specialist, and really didn't know, what was going on. But it was just a very scary, like, okay, they just kept doing ultrasound, and then they brought in a doctor, and then that doctor brought in another doctor, and and then finally brought us into a room to discuss with us, and just told us that Jude had a very rare and biblical abnormality. It was called a varix cyst. And the doctor said, do not go and Google it. Do not, because the stats are alarming. And basically what it came down to was there was an extremely high chance of losing the baby to stillbirth within these situations, and then a smaller but still high chance of having Down syndrome. And so I was in the thick of my grief for my sister still.
Yes.
And it was just like, why, God? It was a real wrestling of, why would, after all these years, the miscarriages, would you allow me to get pregnant to potentially lose the baby? I just really wrestled with that. And that started a process of, I was going, weekly and multiple times, getting ultrasounds and stress tests, and just really monitoring, because it was like the further I went in my pregnancy, the higher the risk of losing him.
Yeah.
And so, and at this point we had learned that we were having a boy, and we chose to name him Jude, because that was my sister's name. She wanted to name her child after her favorite Beatles song, Hey Jude. So we wanted to honor her in that way,
Yeah.
And so as we progressed, we didn't want to do further testing like an amnio or anything because of the risk. And so we just knew that there was a potential that he had Down syndrome. And so my personality, I just started researching and trying to learn everything that I could about what Down syndrome would be like. And when I was 35 weeks pregnant, just my mom gut was telling me, like, he's safer outside than he is inside. I had a younger brother that was born at 32 weeks, and he's great, thriving adult now, and so I was like, 35 weeks doesn't scare me. And so I was seeing my specialist, and I just told her, I was like, I don't know. I was like, my gut's just saying, we need to take him. Like, I'm scared. And she said, well, go see, your doctor tomorrow, and let him, run ultrasound, stress tests, and, let's see. And I didn't find out till after the fact that she called him right after the appointment. She said, hey, Whitney's going to come in tomorrow. Check her out. But if you feel any inkling, just let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and, induce. And so the next day I went in, and it was, he was showing signs of distress. And so they sent me to the hospital, and we were, family started arriving at the hospital, like everybody's excited. And I remember Michael had gone out to the waiting room to visit family. And all of a sudden, every alarm starts going off in the room. And my room fills up immediately with just, 20 people. And it turned out he was decelling. And so we almost lost him. But they quickly prepped me for an emergency C-section, and he was born, safely. But I remember, still, when he was born, they just quickly showed him to me, and real quickly, because he was still, I guess, having some trouble. And he was blue. He was just blue as my shirt, just blue as a little Smurf. I remember seeing, and I kept asking, does he have Down syndrome? And nobody would tell me. Nobody would say anything. But I just kind of, the quick glance, I thought, I was like, okay, he has it. But I just wanted that confirmation. And then because he had this umbilical cord, you remember the old telephones with the little spiral cord? That's what his umbilical cord looked like.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember the nurses were passing it around. So I had actually consented for them to send it off so that it could be researched and everything, because so little was known about it. And I just were like, oh my gosh, it looks like a phone cord. It was just a weird thing. But and they take them away, and I don't get to see them, and that, because they're just taking care of them. And that evening, just another God thing, the pediatrician who happened to be on call, her name was Dr. Laura Lee, and she is a dear, dear friend to us now. But she came into the room that evening, and again, we still don't have Jude, with us. And the very first thing she says to us, not knowing a thing about us, that, Michael's a pastor, but she said, God doesn't make mistakes. And that is what my scared mom heart needed to hear. And then she went on to tell us all of the amazing things that Jude would do, and that they suspected that he had Down syndrome. And, it was just such a positive experience that so many of my friends did not get to have, so I'm so thankful for that. So he spent being, early and having a little bit of complications. He spent first 8 days in NICU and stuff. And during that time, my mind was just reeling, with this diagnosis that I thought I was prepared for, on paper, but your heart's a different thing. And it was very scary. And during this time, Michael was phenomenal. He's often my rock when I'm, spiraling, but he was researching, and he had found these ESPN videos of kids with Down syndrome being the team manager and making the winning shot, to show Michaela and MT, who were 6 and 9, I want to say at the time, to help them understand, because we had shielded them, from everything that was going on, because, their little minds didn't need to have that burden. At that time. And so we waited till we knew for sure. And so, and Michael just explained, hey, this is our new normal, but I told him in my fears and doubts, and, if I could go back and tell Whitney, 12 years ago, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing. But I said, this is it. I can't comprehend adopting. This is me at capacity. I don't think I can handle anything else. And, he graciously was realizing, it's okay, babe, but very quickly, we discovered just, and I'm not sugarcoating Down syndrome. There are hard aspects to it, of course, just like there are with Michaela and MT having hard aspects of any child. But as the time went on, I began to talk to him like, maybe I do want to adopt still, and again, when we were adopting, it was never a child with special needs. And how my desire for adoption came actually was because in high school, I read this book. It was called The Hidden Daughters of China, I believe is the title.
Oh, yes.
And I learned about, what was then the crisis of all these girls being abandoned. And so that was kind of my mindset, not realizing how much things had changed in China.
Right.
But so I said, but babe, I said, I think, what if we adopted a child with Down syndrome? I was like, it's super scary to think about, but I'm a processor. I have to sit on things for a while. So we just, started talking about it. And in 2015, Jude was selected. The Down Syndrome Association in New York City does this contest every year where you submit photos of your child or individual with Down syndrome, and they put a video up on Times Square. They select, I don't know, like 400 or 500 to do it.
Oh my goodness.
Jude was selected.
Oh.
And so we made a family trip of it. We all go to New York City to see his picture, on the Jumbotron in Times Square and participate in the Buddy Walk. And while we're there, there's this precious family that Michael noticed. It was a blonde mom, and she had 3 girls with Down syndrome, all blonde hair. And he was like, that's so unusual, like to have 3 daughters with Down syndrome. So, of course, like we, had to go up and talk to him. And so we go up and we meet the Baz family. And it turned out that they were all 3 adopted. And so Sean and Sarah are amazing. And it was just kind of like another little like nudge for us of what we needed, like just getting to hear their story and their journey to adopt these 3 girls from Eastern Europe. And so it was like, we came back from that trip super excited, like, okay, all right, let's talk about this. Yeah. And so that was September. The next month, October, I'm like scrolling Facebook, just kind of, and I see Max's little picture. And it was just one of those things where I was like, and I'm reading his little description, and it just reminded me so much of Jude and his personality. And so I remember I took a screenshot, I sent it to Michael, and he just simply replied, I'm with you. Aww. So I was like, okay. So now I'm like, okay, he's with WACAP. And so I remember I called WACAP, and I'm shaking and so nervous because I just know that every single woman who saw Max's precious face on Facebook that day was calling about that. And I'm in a mad dash because I know that is my son. Like, I'm calling. And so I'm just, talking to the lady, and the sweet lady who answered, she said, calm down, take a deep breath. She said, we've had his file for a long time, and you're the only person who's ever called. Oh. So the relief, but also just why aren't families storming the gates to come and bring this little boy home? It's just, and that's, there's, adoption is beautiful, but it's also on this opposite side broken because of the fact that there are children without families and the love of families. Yes. But so that started, so then we started the process. We were able to lock down his file and, do all the things that you had to do to adopt. And so then obviously this is where you come in because you had Max, which is just amazing.
Yes. So sweet. I'll never forget when Max came because, when he was at my house, we called him Jordan, and there were I was not at our house whenever the orphanage called to say, we have these 2 little boys and they both need to come from the orphanage. And I was like, well, yes. And so, but I was in America. And so I immediately, because I could still get the messages from the orphanage while I was in America, and the volunteers that were at my house at the time were amazing. And I said, okay, we're going to get these 2 little boys, and I need you to be ready. And because you're there, I'm going to let you give them their names. And they were like, what? We have to have these new boys. You didn't tell us we were going to have to do this. And I was like, it's totally fine. Like, it's the same. Like, just love them, come in. And I was going to be there within a week. And so I was like, it's going to be totally fine. But I don't want them to go a week without having a name that they are called. And so it's really funny now that I think about it, because the one guy, whenever he saw Jordan, he said, "Oh man, this guy's going to be like Michael Jordan." But I don't really want to call him Michael. And I think that's so funny because that's your husband's
Right.
name.
Yeah.
It's
And
your
my
son,
son.
right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So anyway, he's like, so, but I think he looks more like a Jordan. So we're going to call him Jordan. And I was like, oh, I love that. I mean, I had so many kids
Right.
that whenever I would think of names, I would always use somebody's name that meant something special to me. So I would name them after someone or after someone from the Bible or something even that sometimes maybe their Chinese name was similar to,
Right.
just depending on their situation and their story. But anyway, this particular guy, JP, he was like, "Oh, this is gonna be a Jordan. He's gonna be our Michael Jordan. He's gonna be so strong. He's gonna play basketball. He's gonna be all into sports." And him just talking to me all about this stuff, and I was like, "Perfect, Jordan. I love it." And I will never forget whenever I first got there. Back home, I'm all jet lagged, and I just saw both boys, and I was like, "This is Jordan. I see him. He's so sweet." And so, from that moment on, he lived in my little carrier, and everywhere I went, and I did this with most babies that I had, and I would put him in the carrier with me. And I always said Jordan had like lost eyes, um, like he didn't have his family, and so his eyes were lost. Some of my babies would come to me more joyful, like I could tell maybe they had just been abandoned, but I could tell that he had been probably laying in the orphanage for a little bit of time, even though he was super tiny. And so I would, if I had to come, I would always pick which one looked a little bit more lost, and that's the one I would carry in my carrier all the time. So, he went everywhere with me. And, most of my pictures don't have his face in it because he was wrapped up in my carrier and I never put him down. And but I just prayed from the very moment that he came, Lord, just give him a life, like put life into his eyes, put life into his heart. And he struggled like not in any other way except the life part. He thrived. Once we started feeding him, he was like, "Oh my word, food is amazing," And so he took a bottle great. He slept great. He was the easiest little guy. But that always wasn't my favorite thing when they were easy, and I'm like, I need you to have a little bit of like, what's in there? What's going to make you fight, and make you have this. And I just pray that all the time, Lord, just please let him get adopted early to a family who just, that there's such a purpose for him, that understands that there's such a purpose. And so constantly that was my prayer for him. And he did have one little IE that he loved so much. And I'll never forget because she was there when he came from the orphanage. And so my volunteers that were there had her. And for some reason, she had never been attached to any kid, but she immediately attached to him. And he loved her to death. Just anytime. I would take him and hold him and take him places, but when he would come back, he'd be so happy that she was going to pick him up. And she held him all the time. And so she believed in him so much. We all believed in him, but she really believed in him. And I will not ever forget how badly she cried whenever he left, because I had not ever seen her get so attached. There were so many kiddos that we took care of, but he was just her boy. Jordan was her boy. And some of my English names that I picked were hard for my eyes to say, but she would call him Jordan, Jordan, and she would always say that, my boy Jordan, and for years afterwards, I would show her your Facebook and show her his picture, and she would just be so happy. Look what he can do. Look at, all these kinds of things. It was just the most precious thing. But especially the thing that caught me the most was whenever you guys came, he had, in my opinion, and you can say differently, but that was who he was supposed to be with. He just had the light. It came into his eyes, and it was the most beautiful thing. And it helped that we got to have, some talks before and to tell him, your family's coming for you. And just, I'm a full believer that, you assume competence in every way. So we just told him, and I was like, he understands. He knows, we're prepping him, and he knows.
Remember, he had the picture and he would try to zoom.
Yes, all the time. He would try to open it up. So funny.
Yes, yeah.
Oh.
I know. Well, and that's so when we were making travel arrangements and coming to China, we knew Jude, he had medical issues from time he was a baby, where he has bum lungs. He has the same issues with his lungs that my younger sister had. And so they're like, it's not related to the Down syndrome, but it's exacerbated by the Down syndrome, the
Okay.
floppy airways and, just the
Yes.
low muscle tone and everything. And so coming to China, with the air pollution and just, it was not, feasible. So he stayed at home with family. But we were able to bring Michaela and MT. But then another big part of it was, so my sister's husband was Tyler. And a couple of years after she passed away, he married one of my best friends, Katie. And Katie actually spent time in China. Her entire family did actually they spent time in China. And so when we said we were doing this, she said, please, can we go? Can we come with you? Can we just be whatever you need us to be? And she speaks Mandarin and she always says, I'm rusty, but she did phenomenal. But they wanted to come with us and they brought their daughter or her daughter, Riley, who was Michaela's age, and they were, best friends. And so they traveled with us. And I just loved that we were able to show up, that November 7th, to meet you, to, get Max, that we were showing up with an army of people, to visibly show like there are so many people that love you and are fighting for you and, have been praying for you. And just like, I just remember that first moment, holding him in my arms and how special, and it was never, there was never a doubt about Max. And, and I would be, have people ask me, like, how do you, like, how did you choose them? Or, how, like, why China and stuff. And I'm like, well, that's because that's where our son is. Like, I was always firm. And it was funny because, like, when we had Michaela and then I was pregnant with MT, and I remember being, like, scared. How can I love this second baby as much as I love Michaela, not knowing that your heart just expands,
Yes.
And so, but like with Max, there was never any doubt of, I knew it in my gut that this was my son. And, so just having that full picture of us coming, and then you've flown into Atlanta, and now you've recently flown in. So you
Yeah.
remember it used to be you would come up those escalators,
Yeah.
and it was all wide open, and you would have the arrivals, but now they've put up that that wall. But I remember coming up those escalators with Max, and our family, our friends from church, just they were all waiting for us when we came up to see the the escalators, and seeing them after 17 days away, from Jude, and just, having that tangible, all of these people who had, helped us financially, prayerfully, they did everything, to help us bring Max home, was such a beautiful thing. And, I always say our adoption was a fairy tale. I mean, so many things just lined up perfectly, for it. And not to say that everything was easy, because adoption is, a sign of a broken world. And, there were definitely things that, were difficult, and mistakes that I made, as a newly adoptive mom, because like one thing, my personality, Jude was in therapy from the get-go. He started it when he was 2 months old.
Right.
And so like in my mind, I was thinking, okay, we got to do this, this, and this. We got to get Max going. And I wish in hindsight that I had slowed down with that and, just waited longer. I only waited maybe 3 or 4 months before starting. But I was just worried about, like, I didn't, with either of them, I don't want to be the reason that they don't meet their full potential because of something I do wrong or, don't do.
Right.
And, but Max and Jude's relationship, I mean, they are hilarious. They are so funny together. And then seeing how they've changed Michaela and MT's lives. Michaela, she started UGA a couple of years ago as a freshman, and she learned about UGA Miracle, which is a student-led organization that raises money for CHOA, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta.
Yeah.
And she's now like, she called me first week. I was like, Mom, I have to be a part of this, so excited. And so she's now each year kind of worked her way up the ranks. So next year she'll be serving, on council. They've raised, each year over $1 million for CHOA. Wow. And, and that's just because she has seen what Max has been extremely healthy. We were very grateful, but Jude's had a rougher medical road. And so just seeing how much Choa had an impact on our lives. And then MT, he's a big baseball player and everything. And so he started, we live in a rural country community, and there wasn't anything local for individuals with special needs for sports. And so a few years ago, he started a special needs kickball league. And we just finished our 4th season, and, he organized everything with, we'd have about each season up to like 30 participants with special needs. And he got baseball teammates and volunteers from our church, to come out and play. And so just seeing the impact of like what Down syndrome has had on their lives, to see the world differently with more compassion.
Yes.
It's just, I'm very, very thankful for that Down syndrome diagnosis that Jude had, because without it, we would have never found Max,
Yes.
So
It's so incredible. I remember when we went to that restaurant. Do you remember when we went to that restaurant and we were sitting in a circle and there was all those different,
yes,
the little tortilla things. And I was just like, I have kind of like a picture in my mind, or I mean, I think it's more like a video in my mind of that whole situation of your whole family, all the ones. And you were telling me when we were sitting there about your brother or your brother-in-law, but it wasn't your brother-in-law anymore because then your sister passed away and then he has his wife and that she lived in China, and you were telling me all that at this table. And I just remember like thinking about the goodness of God.
Right, because only God in that situation would somebody travel with their sister who's died's husband, who's now remarried.
Yes,
To come up. Like,
and I just kept thinking, wow,
yes.
this is really remarkable, but how she could speak some Chinese,
Right.
and just how everyone immediately loved him and just accepted him. And he was just a part of your family. I mean, it had been like one day, and then there you all were. And it was just the most beautiful thing to see him, what he was going to have,
Right.
And how his needs were going to be so met. And the first time that I got to come and see him after we had come back from China, and I, truthfully, in my heart, whenever I saw him, I was so overwhelmed. I mean, there had been so much trauma that had happened in us, but I was so overwhelmed with just like how amazing that he was, with the struggle of, Lord, why doesn't everybody do what, Whitney's family has done? I mean, just how he was so enveloped in your family. And also, it's so funny to me because sometimes I feel like he looks just like Jude. I'm like, nobody would know he's Chinese. Like, he looks the same. I mean, I think that about my adopted kids too.
Right.
Like, we all look the same.
So he is so bow-legged, and Michael is so bow-legged, and so like I'll be like, look at you and your daddy's bow-legged, like you honestly forget.
Yes.
And it does crack me up because I can't, especially when they were younger. Okay, I'll admit it was just till a couple of years ago I gave them the autonomy to start picking out their own clothes. But I love to coordinate them. If one, was just always would coordinate them, and I would get asked constantly, "Are they twins?" And I'd be like, one is as white as could be, and one is clearly Asian. Like, no, they're not twins. And so like I would sometimes, if I was feeling cheeky, I'd be like, yes, they're 3, but they were born 3 months apart. So,
Yes.
And then their looks like what?
Right, exactly.
But yes, I mean, it really. I mean, we can't imagine life before Max. It's as if he's always been.
Yes. Yes, and that's just so how the Lord is, whenever he picks our children. And I mean, I've literally had it more whenever I was living there with my adopted kids, and they're like, well, how did you pick them? I'm like, I can't even explain to you. I didn't.
Right.
Like when the Lord has put it on your heart, the child, like you've seen the child and you're like, that one's mine. Like, I don't even know. I can't explain it.
Right.
Except you just have to trust the Lord, and that like that's what he put in your heart. And I have to believe that there was a purpose for that, even though I don't understand it. And sometimes it's really hard, and there wasn't a way that I could physically adopt them all.
Right.
But the Lord had a purpose in who he chose to adopt each one. And it's just such an amazing thing. And I think that's another reason why they fit together so well in your family, and people say things like the twin thing, and you're like, that's just how it was supposed to be.
Right.
And so then even, when husbands and wives kind of look the same as they get older, you're
Right.
like, that's why it happens that way. Cause that's how the Lord knits you together. You're the family, and he is just such a part of your family. So if you were going to talk to people, cause I know like you have both experiences. You have the experience of biologically having a son with a disability and the fears that will come into that, and just maybe even grieving, like you talked about,
Right.
grieving. Why would the Lord, allow you to have, and the preparation of the grief and then the actual experience of this is what it is,
Mm-hmm.
it is different, I
It
think.
is.
And then whenever you choose a child, that's the way it is perceived when you adopt. It's perceived as though you've chosen the child, even though I really have to say that the Lord chooses our children
Mm-hmm.
for us, and we have to be obedient.
Right.
We do have to choose to be obedient, but the Lord really chooses who they are. And so what was that, how did that fit into your heart? Like, I know you talked a lot about how because of Jude, you felt called with Max,
Mm-hmm.
but what was your grief like? Did you feel like it was like a season, or you felt like, oh, today I just like accepted? What did
Yeah.
that look like?
Um, the grief, I would say it's ongoing, honestly.
Okay.
I mean, because there are hard moments still, where that loss of the typical child. So, for example, Jude is 12,
Hmm.
and Max and Jude are very complementary, and like their strengths and weaknesses one has and one doesn't. And Jude is more socially aware, and having a big brother and sister who, you know, MD has a girlfriend and they both drive and going off to college. And so Jude has all of these desires.
Hmm.
Mom, I'm going to drive. He keeps telling me in 3 days, take me to the airport, I'll go to college. Like he's so intent on doing all these big things. And, and I'm not saying he can't one day do all of these things.
Right.
But it's going to be harder.
Hmm.
It's going to look different, it's not going to come as easily as it did for Michaela and MT. And I mean, that's the reality of it. I don't want to limit any of my children for their dreams, but there's just kind of that grief of, and he has an imaginary friend, Kai, that he talks about nonstop.
Oh, that's
And,
precious.
and I think, it's just this desire to have, connection. And our church and the community that we have built around us are very safe for the boys. And they are phenomenal. They are phenomenal with them. And so I could not ask for a better situation. But, if we do go to a park and there's typical children and then there's Max and Jude, and, they're not always included, things are said. And that so there's just kind of that grief continues. And then, when Jude was born, one of the things I struggled with really weirdly to me, was the empty nest. It was like realizing, I remember we walked into a restaurant with a group of friends. We were camping and we walked into this restaurant and there was this older couple, and they had this older adult son with Down syndrome. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I had to go outside and cry. And Michael was like, "What's going on?" And I said, "We're never going to have an empty nest." And he's like, "Well, you don't know that." He's like, "We might,
Right, right.
but I'm like, "No," but like it was so like just kind of grieving, and like it's kind of resurfaced because here's MT going off to college, in August, where, and it's like, but at the time, like what Michael said to me, he was like, "Well, what if something ever happened to Michaela or MT and they had to live with us the rest of their lives? How would you feel?" And I'm like, "Well, of course." And he's like, "Well, it's the same thing, And I'm like, "You're right." Like, and so real, and now though, I'm also kind of happy, like, oh, I'm not going to have an empty nest. Like, because I'm grieving like my older two are, moving on in life.
Yes.
But, there's just like, just kind of seeing those things. So, there's grief that I think it just continues. But the joy far outweighs the grief. And, as far as when we made the like adopting Max, the thing that drove me crazy with Jude was people would ask me, did I know? And the implication, like meaning, did I know that he had Down syndrome when I was pregnant with him? And the implication being that, I could have done something about it. And then actually, in truth, that option was offered to me. And I was emphatically like, no, it does not matter. This is my child no matter what. And, but that it really grated on my nerves being asked, did I know? And whether that was like just my own personal things, not that every person asking that was coming from that place, but, I was kind of, just my hackles were up about it. And so I felt like when we chose to adopt Max, it was saying to the world, we did not have a choice with Jude, but we had a choice with Max, and we would choose him over and over and over again. And so, yes, I mean, I can't imagine any world where we did not pursue and adopt Max.
I love it so much.
You know,
It just, yeah, it's just, he's just yours.
yeah.
He's
You
just,
know,
he's
and
just your boy.
back to like mine and Michael's, high school sweetheart plannings of having 3 children and adopting 4.
Yes.
Never would I have dreamed, junior, senior Whitney, that this is what my life would be. But now I can't imagine it any different.
Right. It's so funny. This old song that, I thank God for unanswered prayers, and I
Right.
just think, oh, that's such a, just a trite little song
Right.
and all the
Right.
things. But it's so true how we have our own plans, but the
Right.
Lord, He's the one who guides our steps. He's the one who leads us down these paths. And
Exactly.
what a joy it is to walk with Him, and not our own plans.
Right.
That would
Exactly.
really have made a mess of our lives.
Yes.
know?
Yes.
And
Exactly.
just what an honor. You even honored your sister, and with Jude's name, that's so sweet. And I think about all the people that you've ministered to with children with Down syndrome, and maybe if you don't mind talking a little bit, I know you have very much an advocacy for like the buddy walk, and you have kind of dedicated that to your boys. And
Yes. So when Jude was born and I was researching, there wasn't a lot of positive, to find on the internet. And so we decided to start, like I started their Instagram. Now it's at Max and Jude, but just to kind of show what daily life was like with Down syndrome. And, just because it was such a scary diagnosis to me.
yeah,
I didn't know. I mean, I had no concept of what life was going to be like. And just like Sharon, what a cute boy. I mean, it's just amazing,
adorable.
And so that kind of started it. And then when Jude was 9 months old and he had his first extended hospital stay with his lungs and everything, and that just kept going and going and going. And I realized, oh gosh, like the medical side expenses, like that's another aspect of it. And fortunately, we were in a place that we were okay, but just as I was making connections and things, and so we decided to start a 5K race on World Down Syndrome Day, which is the day that he happened to come home from the hospital, March 21st, when he was born. And so we started that 5K, and so we just had our 12th race. And so initially it was to help families going through medical crisis. That was kind of the initial. And then when we decided to adopt Max, realized how expensive adoption is.
Yes, yes.
And so Max was our first recipient we then kind of added on a caveat of, okay, let's still help families with medical crisis, but let's really focus on families adopting because of how expensive it is. And I don't want money to ever be a hindrance for a child finding a home.
Yes.
And so that's been another big leg of the 5K. And so just each year, our community has come out big. And so we've been able to continue to do that and to advocate. And my favorite part of it is we have what we call grand marshals. And so as I've made connections in the community with families that have children with Down syndrome, they all come to the race, and kind of a red carpet experience. Like we introduce them, and then after all of they have been introduced with their short bios, our participants form 2 long lines. We call it the tunnel of encouragement, and they kick off the race by running through or walking or strolling through the tunnel of encouragement. And then they go out on the race course and they cheer on and give high fives to our runners. And so it just really, I'm a big believer in visual and like putting a face, to a cause. And so like, I think our participants seeing, all of our grand marshals, just their energy and how amazing they are, just really connects and builds that. And so we have so many, that come out year in and year out and support the race.
Wow.
But yeah, advocacy is very big. Just kind of our tagline is that we've been using is more alike than different. It's showing we're more alike than different. We want to reduce the stigma of disability, and we want to advocate, for orphans.
Yes.
And yeah, so that's our heart, and what we try to live and do. And there's times where I can get burnt out on social media,
Yes.
and then like I can't tell you how many times that we've been somewhere in public, and it can be a little scary too. But like somebody will come up, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Max and Jude. I follow your page, or, or something. And, at first you're like, well, Whitney, you do have a public page. So that's going to happen. It comes with it. But then there's been so many times that I've met a family and they're like, yes, when our child was born, we were told to come, go to your Instagram account. And what a comfort, and being able to see it's going to be okay.
Yes.
And, and so that's what reminds me of when, I'm burnt out on it, of this is why I'm doing it, because, helping, because I wish I had had that, because, I was very scared and I grieved very hard. And, that's one of the first things as I talk to new, moms, we often have dinner with families that either have a prenatal diagnosis or have just had. And the very first thing I tell them is give yourself the grace to grieve. You grieve, you give yourself that grace, but just know it's going to be amazing. It's your world has changed for the better forever. And so.
Oh, I love that so much. Well, if you were going to talk to somebody today, a mom who was scared, what would you, if you could just have like one or two lines to tell her, what would you tell her? And then what would you say to a mom who was excited to bring home their child that they are adopting from those two different perspectives? What would you say to those mamas?
To the first mom scared, I would say, give yourself the grace to grieve, but find your community, reach out. And that's so many times I find moms that I'll be connected with and they're like, I'm not ready yet. That's okay. Yeah. Take your time, but do find, because I was fortunate enough to be in a work situation where I could travel to Atlanta, which is about an hour away, every Thursday to Gigi's Playhouse. We had in downtown Atlanta, we had a Gigi's Playhouse. And it wasn't about, at the time, it was just Jude, because we adopted Max when he was 2.5. Right. I don't know if we ever mentioned that timeline. But it was for me to connect with the fellow moms, because we all had children, all right there. And they, have been such a support system. I can send out a text with a question and I get, answers, very quickly. And so finding that support system, because only fellow parents with Down syndrome or a disability knows what it's like. That's right. I mean, you can try to explain it, but until you're living it, and so having those connections is extremely important. And so I would encourage that once you're in a place that you can reach out, make those connections. I think they're vital.
Yes.
And then to the adopting mom, learn from my mistake and just cocoon and love as long as possible. And don't, the rest will come. The therapies, the medical, that will all come. There's time for that, but just treasure and cocoon and take in that time, that bonding time, as quickly as possible. And I do want to say to you, how grateful our family is for you and for the love, because I think the system that you had set up of family style units made Max's attachment to us. I could totally credit that, because he learned bonds and attachments. And so he was able to attach and bond to us. And unfortunately, that's not the case for every child in an orphanage situation. And so the work that you did and are continuing to do, we are beyond grateful. Because we know that's a big part of our fairy tale adoption story.
So. You're so sweet. You didn't need to say that.
Well,
yes, it was a joy. It was a joy to have him, and it's a joy to see him. I'm so grateful that you allowed me to still be, able to see him. Yes. Such a joy. So thank you so much for being here. And
yes,
I'm so excited that the world will get to hear the story. But anyways, thank you so much, and I just bless your family.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.